Hello, welcome to another edition of Truth and Rhythm, brought to you by funkandstuff.net. This is the interview show that gets deep into the pocket with contemporary music's foremost masters of the groove. Available in video format at YouTube and also at funkandstuff.net. Truth and Rhythm can now also be enjoyed on the go from iTunes as an audio podcast and from other leading providers. I'm your host, Scott Dr. Goldfine, musicologist and author of Everything is on the One, the First Guide to Funk. Get your copy at Amazon if you don't already. Whether you're watching or listening, I thank you very much for your continued support and interest. My guest today is keyboardist Danny Bedrosian, who spent more than a decade, actually I think 2 decades, as a key member of George Clinton's Parliament-Funkadelic, or PFunk organization, as well as producing several releases under his own name and as a supporting player for many other acts. So, Danny, thank you so much for being here again.
Yes, thank you, Scott. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I say again because we've tried a couple of times and we've had some technical issues, so we're really keeping our fingers crossed this time.
Yes.
And even now, Danny's coming to us from the road. Why don't you just for a minute real quick talk about the leg of the tour you're doing right now?
Sure. We are on the West Coast leg of the PFunk 2017 summer tour, George Clinton Parliament-Funkadelic, and we are currently in Petaluma awaiting our next show, which is actually in Berkeley, California. But then we will be playing in Petaluma right after that as well. And we're just on an off day here and just got in from Portland. We just did the Pacific Northwest. So amazing shows up there, Seattle and Portland, 3 shows up that way. And now we're hitting the California leg of the tour and really looking forward to it. So.
Amazing. It's been quite a tour this year. I mean, you went to, the East Coast and the Midwest and over to Europe. And wow, it's really been an epic.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, George is really just to this day a master, a true master of ceremonies, if you will. Like, he's really just still got an amazing legacy and organization, and is constantly moving forward with his goals and dreams, which is really just really inspiring. It's a very inspiring thing to be a part of and just to behold, to witness.
Just an incredible force of nature. George just turned 76 this past month and still going strong, and we just love it.
Yes, absolutely. We're very happy about that.
So Danny, before we get rolling into some current things that are happening now, let's talk a little bit about, where you hail from. I know from Massachusetts, and you're a bit of a child prodigy. So can you just talk a little bit about, how music came to be in your blood?
Yeah, sure, of course. Music goes back very far for me in my family. I was the son of classically trained concert pianists who also ran their own piano school. I was raised in northern Massachusetts and southern New Hampshire, and was born in Lawrence, Massachusetts, which is an industrial city in northern Mass. Parents hailed from Worcester and from Lawrence, my mother and father respectively, and were and are genius concert pianists, and really ingrained and enriched my sisters and myself and our lives with our classical piano training. We were enrolled in the school, continue to have to this day, and it was an amazing musical experience to have, an amazing training to have, practicing every day, lessons every week, recitals seasonally, and competitions as well. And being a part of that experience was something I don't want to say I took it for granted, but I definitely didn't realize the vitality and importance and how much musical nurturing went on a minute-to-minute basis in my upbringing. So I'm really ecstatic now when I think back about it, about how awesome that was. And my house, most of the times, there was more than one piano playing at all times. So, because the school was in the house. So you know, we had students coming over, and you got to meet people from all walks of life. And it was just really an amazing experience. And I wouldn't trade that for the world. You know, it is what made me the player that I am today. And I wouldn't be the type of musician I am today without that formal classical training. Also, it's my father who, you know, took me to my first James Brown concert and introduced me to other forms of music as well. So they're also both incredible singers. We sang in the choir because they always did church gigs. My father was a choir director at a local church. My mother was the organist, and they did various church gigs at different denominations over the years. And a lot of times my sisters and myself were in those choirs as well. So we had that vocal training that went on for a lot of years, that SATBB group vocal harmonizing and stuff like that was also in my blood. So those are a big part of why I am the musician I am today. So yeah, and they are to this day the most brilliant concert pianists I've ever seen to this day. So.
Wow, that's something else. So, you know, what's very cool about that especially is not only were they so gifted musically, it sounds like, but also that they had an open mind as to different types of music, and they were willing to expose you to that. Danny, I'm wondering, you know, how much do you think that your ability then is, you know, nurture versus nature?
I've heard this before, and I've talked about this at some length before. I think it might be 50-50. I don't really know if we can truly pinpoint, but both of my parents also came from fairly musical families. Most of my aunts and uncles are musicians as well, or singers. There was a lot of that on both sides. And excuse me, after doing a DNA test and finding out about on my father's side that our real last name was Orbelian, not Bedrosian, and the Orbelians were a royal family of Armenia, and they must have had to change their name to escape from one of the persecutions by one of the Turkoman tribes at a certain point. But they decided to change the name, but for whatever reason, the Orbelians, even after they lost their power, remained in the arts very heavily. And most of them are conductors and composers and pianists, a very large number. And the ones who aren't are like archaeologists and museum directors at the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, and very like auspicious places in terms of musicology and ethnography and archaeology and things like this. So I think it's just in my blood as well. Especially after taking the DNA test, I think it's much more ingrained than I knew, you know. But I think it's a little of both. I think it's definitely a little of both. Without the training, I wouldn't be where I am. I would just maybe have some inert version of it, and without the it being so far back in my blood, maybe it wouldn't have been something I would have given so much interest to. So I think you need both, you know.
Very interesting. So Danny, let's talk about, you know, when you got a little bit older into your teens, and you know, you started becoming very interested in Parliament-Funkadelic and following them, and there was a contest you entered in that got their attention and kind of helped you infiltrate that world, if you will. So just tell us how you came to be part of PFunk.
When I first got into P-Funk, it was definitely a genre of music that, to me, brought together all the different forms that I was either having to do for work or that I really liked. So I grew up in a generation where my peers and myself, it was listening to a lot of hip-hop, and there was a lot of metal. And a lot of the little groups of kids were broken up into what those subgenres within those two genres. And once I found out about P-Funk through sampling when I was a preteen, you know. once I discovered the albums themselves and started listening to, I was probably about 11 when I started listening. And I realized, oh, wow, this brings together, you know, some of the things, you know, I was a classically trained kid who started studying jazz when I was about 10 as well. So I'd already been into jazz a couple of years. I was playing in groups, hip hop groups and metal groups. That was all over the place. So this really married the rock, all the different things together. And I was really into R&B. And I had not only maybe 4 years before discovered James Brown, thanks to my father. So, and I'd been into Ray Charles, again, thanks to my father, things like that. My mother introduced me to the Beatles. To me, P-Funk married all those things. And then I found out as time went on that it also was an influencer for some of those aforementioned things. So super interested in that, and then finding out that it's this great institution that the mighty force in and of itself, and got into the discography. So upon really discovering this music, being a fusion and a creator of a lot of the stuff that I was into, it really made the most sense for me to just start studying this really deeply. And even though I, of course, continued on my classical and jazz training along this same time too, P-Funk was just the music I really listened to as a kid, liking music, you know. So I studied it with the same type of fervor and passion that a classical pianist would study his own classical music. And I think that I say this over and over again, a lot of classical people don't apply that classical study skill that is so ingrained in them that they learn, and that helps them make them such masters of music. But they don't apply it to other genres when it comes time to having to do something with that genre. And very few times do I see classical musicians find their way out. That's why they're so rare in popular music. Maybe not rare, but to see them marrying the classical and popular is much more rare. Someone like Bernie Worrell, who really influenced me, obviously, in a lot of ways. But you know, upon discovering this music, I was really into exploring the discography and finding out as much about it as I could. And then, yes, there was a contest. There was a chance to make George's bed sheet, where George was wearing these bed sheets in the 90s. And I also came from an artistic family. There's a lot of painters and artists in my family. So I used to draw a little when I was younger. I really wanted to do comic books at one time in my life. So I created this pretty good, pretty good bed sheet for him that had all these different drawings and different characters from the legacy of the mythology of P-Funk. It had lyrics written, all these colors, and rump of steel skin on the front, and the One Nation flag on the back, and aliens, and it was cool, you know. And got to meet the whole band, including George, and drop off the bedsheet. He wore it at the show, and I took every chance to drop off my music upon meeting those guys, and several of them liked what they heard, and it led to a friendship that allowed me to come down and do session work in Florida as a still teenager by this point. When I first won the contest, I was 16 or 17, and when I first started doing studio work, I was about 19. But something George had said to me himself was, finish school, because I had told him my intent, my hope was to, land a job or some kind of work with the band. I was really interested in it, and I told him about my studying over the years of this group and its legacy, and to the point where even when I was a teenager, I'd sung for him some songs from like the band's catalog, but from like the 60s, from like the Northern Soul era, and that really impressed him, and he was just like always like, oh wow, Danny, finish your school. But when I was still in college, I attended university in New Hampshire. I had the opportunity to do those sessions. I was still a teenager at the time, 18 and 19. And then by the time I was in my early 20s and finishing up college, I had started doing some teching gigs for the band, just in the Northeast, but doing tech work for Jerome Rogers and for Razor. And those were my first gigs. working at a show, just doing keyboard technician, providing keyboard tech stuff. And then after I finished college, I moved down to Tallahassee, not with any necessary promises in mind, just hoping that I could land some kind
leap of faith.
Leap of faith. Yep. I graduated at UNH in Middle Eastern Studies, you know what I mean? But I had a whole lifetime of musical study under my belt and was ready to try this out. So then I took a leap of faith and went down to Tallahassee and started working in the studio doing sessions. And it just so happened that a job out on the road had become available, keyboard technician for Jerome and Bernie and Razor, and I took the gig. And but my first gig I was playing. In fact, my first gig playing with the band, I actually played the whole show. It was in September of 2003. I played Fender Rhodes. And then my first time playing multiple shows, I was doing full technician work, and that's when I was on the books on the road. And but my very first show I was playing, and even my second show, they pull me out on a certain song. I'd play a certain song, and then over time it ended up with me in the keyboard chair, so to speak.
So you mentioned, when you got into the back discography and all that, I mean, I just remember thinking back, when I first got into that and what an amazing world it was to discover, and just, all the mythology and all the different configurations, and, it's just such a deep, complex, amazing world. Anyone who first gets into it, there's nothing quite like that experience. So,
yeah, absolutely.
So this is around the mid-90s, right, when you got rolling with it. And, I have this CD that I'd shown up before, and I think you said you were on a live cut on this one.
Yeah, yep.
But it wasn't until the next one that you really were doing a lot more session work, right?
Yeah, well, it's funny because, I started doing session work before I was even in the band. So, that's the way that the releases go. George is, much like how Miles Davis was, very much in charge of his releases and how they're carried out. A session may come from a whole different decade that gets released later, and of course evolves over time in terms of the mix and how George decides to produce it. But no, I was doing as many sessions before I was even on any of the albums as I was when I was on the album, if that makes sense. In fact, a lot of times once the guys go out and do more live work, the unwritten rule is that they somehow do less sessions. But at one point, I think I did, and then I kind of went back around to doing more sessions again, even though I was still a live guy, if that makes sense. No, 2005 was how late. I had already done vast swath of sessions, but I had already been on a few live albums before that too. So if you count live albums, the first live stuff I was on was the two instant live, live in Atlanta and live in Portland, Maine. Yeah. I'm on like one cut on each of those, and then I was on the whole Montreux, live at Montreux Jazz Festival DVD and CD release. That's me and Bernie. And then How Late. And I'm on, but like I said, the ironic thing or whatever is that the cut I'm on How Late is a live cut. And then there are several other live video and CD releases before I was on Gangsters of Love. And that's a studio cut. I'm on that alongside Kendra and George and Chavo Odagian from System of a Down. And we wrote that song, Stillness in Motion. And then after that was Shake the Gate. And I did a lot of this stuff simultaneously on Shake the Gate, and then also on the upcoming. I'm on even more stuff on the upcoming Parliament album as well on Medicaid Fraud Dog.
Yeah, I wish I could hold that one up, but I can't.
Right, but I'm on about 17 cuts on Shake the Gate though, and I'm on a lot of the ones on there. Pole Power, Meow Meow, Get Low, God, there's I'm gonna be your dog forever. Yellow Light, Catching Boogie Fever. There you go again. There's a lot. Like I said, 17. I'm on 17 on there. I can't remember all of them, but a bunch. Brothers Be Like George and all that. And I'm proud of the keyboard stuff I did on there. I was really psyched to be on tracks that were also had Sly Stone on them and David Lee Chong and the Detroit Symphony Orchestra and Fred Wesley and so that's, I mean, it's an honor. It's a real honor, and I'm proud of the stuff I did on that album. I really like that album. It's got a ton of stuff. I mean, there's a lot.
So back when you first got with the band, I'm thinking, you know, the first one or a few times that you were out there just playing with them, you know, were you just thinking, man, somebody pinch me? And were you also thinking, man, if I blink, this might go away? Or did you feel like, man, I'm at home? I can't hear you.
Are you there? Okay. Yeah. All right. It just froze for a second. No, it was a surreal experience to be in the band that I always wanted to be in, for sure. And it definitely was just a dream come true. Still is. You know, it's why I've stayed so loyal to the PFunk cause, is because it's also my favorite group. And it's more than a group, you know, and I think, and everybody who knows the music, I mean, there's treatises written about this. People have majored in this in college. It's been academicized. It is more than a band. It's become known to be more than a genre. It's become known to be more than a movement, more than an institution. P-Funk is P-Funk. It's almost, you know, or undefinable, certainly unclonable, as I've used before for certain members of the band to describe members of the band. But yeah, it's a dream come true. I'm honored. I'm very honored, and at the same time, you have to, over time, like everybody's always talked about, you put your own stamp on what you do too. So I continue to study to this day, and I still practice anywhere between 2 and 6 hours a day every day of piano. You know, and that's my classical regiment that I'm keeping up, really. But I also continue to study the P-Funk, and we always have new stuff we're working on. We just debuted a new song that hasn't even come out yet the last 3 shows for the first time ever. I'm Gonna Make You Sick. It's on the next Parliament album. And it's a Junie track. And it sounds great live. And we've done it maybe 3 times, you know, other than in rehearsal. And we rehearsed, you know, pretty vigorously for it to get it right, and it sounds really good. So a nice taste of the ever-redeeming and constantly evolving thing that is the P-Funk, you know?
So how much, you know, you said that you're on 17 cuts on Shake the Gate, and of course you're on the new one. How much input and influence do you have at this point in what's being produced or played, and how's that compared to your earlier years?
I mean, I think I probably, you know, when you're at any organization for any amount of time, your position probably, or should, or hopefully increases in value in terms of the intrinsic value, the internal value, the value for the overall organization, and your personal value and what you're worth goes up over time. So for sure, it's definitely, I can say unequivocally, greater than it was when I first came in, for sure. That being said, it's always about the producer, what needs to be on that record, and maintaining versatility is, I think, the key. End of story. Versatility, no matter what. Open-mindedness, versatility. And I think that's what's allowed me to maybe maintain the position and grow laterally, both as a player and within the organization in terms of my input, I guess, you know. So I think that's probably a good way of putting it.
Are there any particular tracks? You know, I saw the band when they're in Charlotte, I think it was in April, when we talked about while you were there, and that was really cool. Are there any cuts in particular that are a little more challenging than others to play, or you just kind of roll with it all?
In terms of playing live in the show?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Well, there's different versions of hard, you know, and I think playing in PFunk is a great example of that, because there's different types of feel that you have to master in this band's repertoire that are not really equaled in other groups. It's just a type of feel, the plain field feel, if you call it, the funkadelic feel. It's a certain type of pocket that even other funk bands don't do. So when it comes to the understanding of that, your average good musician may not know what that is or how to do it. So therefore, for them, that's beyond hard. It's impossible. So things like that can be considered impossible for some people. Now, I can only base it on my own personal thing. I think that the feel of P-Funk for me was, even though it was something that was intrinsically inside me, I was a very romantic concert pianist, so for me it was all about feel. But really mastering that pull and push and how it goes is something that everybody has to undertake, and it's something that Bernie Worrell was a master of, and Cordell Boogie Mossoon was a master of, and a lot of our guys that we do still have with us. But it's a smaller group of people that understand that than in other types of music, even in their age group, among most of my peers. And it just so happens that most of my peers aren't my age, you know, and that has a certain thing with it, you know. But so that can be considered what's challenging. What can also be considered somebody as challenging is something that you have to do in a certain type of repetition. I remember when I first joined the band, George would do these certain grooves, and you'd have to repeat them really, really over these really just crazy expanses of time at certain tempos. And then, of course, there's what people consider difficult in just the natural musical theory wide, you know, definition. And with that, yeah, there are certain songs that are more difficult than others, but there will be certain songs that are more difficult for drums, for instance, and more songs that are more difficult for the keyboards. There are certain songs that require more parts to be played. And, you know, if you have a song that's got 5 or 6 Bernie Worrell keyboard overdubs, and you're one man playing the keyboard, you have to find a way to internally canonize those 5 or 6 parts into one person playing 4 keyboards, you know. And so there's all kinds of ways. And then it varies chronologically through time or just with different personnel. I play totally different parts based on who I'm playing with, especially in terms of keyboards. And even though the majority of the time I've been in the band, most instances it's been just me, I've also had major instances where it's me and Bernie, me and Jerome, me and Amp, me and Jerome and Bernie, me and Jerome and Bernie and Razor. So I've had all those combinations in my time with the group. And in every combination I had to play different parts. And so did the other constituent members of the aforementioned combination. So in terms of difficulty, it all depends on a person's interpretation of difficulty, because you can really name a whole list of things that make it difficult. A lot of people have trouble playing an ensemble. Even good college-trained music major people have a lot of trouble playing in ensemble, and this is an ensemble. It's a huge group. Part is a part-driven group. If you don't really know the parts, you can be in trouble. And it's also, I always say the canon is as important as the song. I always say this about P-Funk. And with any song, you have different versions of that song, the way it was played by subsequent members over time, the way the different versions of the songs that George released, like Red Hot Mama or I Want to Testify, for instance, or The Goose. These songs had multiple versions, or Heart Trouble, which has like 4 or 5 versions. As in I Love You has like 3 or 4 versions. So the canon is the most important thing. Do you know the way every guy who played your instrument played this song over time, and the original, and the other versions or whatever? That's the best way to really master it. And so I think that that's and not even to say that I know that on everything, but I just think that's the way I try to approach it. and that can be hard for people. Or just, you know, the way that working with these grandiose, these famous big time band leaders like James Brown and George Clinton, for instance, working under that's a certain type of difficulty. Understanding the direction is a certain type of difficulty that a lot of players can't do. Playing the songs in almost any key, because you might be doing a medley. You have to immediately transpose like that. That could be considered the more difficult thing. Or playing a part because it's just a hard part to play, you know. Or a lot of times P-Funk parts are misconstrued. People are playing them wrong. It's actually this. Oh, that's even more difficult. Or just not what they thought they heard. That can be the difficult thing. So with P-Funk, you name it. The discography is so big, and the people who played in the group are so many and so genius in so many different eras. You can just name a whole laundry list of things that you could describe as being the most difficult thing. It's definitely not for every musician, but almost any musician would, if they looked at it from the inside or even peered through real quick, be like, oh, that's vast. You know, that's vast. There's a lot to that, you know.
Wow, so many variables, Danny. So are there a couple of tracks, though, I mean, maybe as many as, you know, 3 or 5, though, that for whatever reason are among your favorite, if not to play, then just in the canon, and why?
Well, my favorite album in the canon is Let's Take It to the Stage. And it's probably my favorite album of all time. So sometimes I take it outside the realm of P-Funk when I think of it, because it's so up there for me. And my second favorite is probably Osmium. And my third favorite is probably Funkadelic. They're all different eras. But those are my favorite albums. Now, as far as ones that I play, because there are certain songs I play every night, they hold a certain value in terms of, you know, everybody always talks about, in everybody, it could be any band. It could be talking about the Allman Brothers or the Rolling Stones or P-Funk or whoever. You ever get sick of playing this song or that song? And the answer is pretty much no, I don't. But which ones are always fun, that can kind of show you the breadth and life of a song, at least for you personally. And I guess Knee Deep is kind of like that for me. But yeah, Knee Deep, I'd say, for ones that we do. For ones that we don't do, there's songs that we've done once or twice ever. That's how big this discography of this band is. But when we did them, they were great. Like I initiated a Joyful Process in Paris a couple of years ago, and it was awesome. We did the whole song. So much fun. There was a couple times that we did The Song Is Familiar from Let's Take It to the Stage. Very rare, but I love doing that. Very rarely, but every once in a while, we did Trash a Go-Go. I love that. Yeah, when it comes to doing the rare ones, I love doing that kind of stuff. Name the song, and I love it. You know what I mean? I can't pick a favorite when it comes to the stuff that we rarely do, because I'm always a strong proponent of doing it. You know, so it's really just like, oh, yeah, that's the one, you know. But for ones we do a lot, you know, I love Maggot Brain. I love Knee Deep. I love Flashlight. I love them all. You know what I mean? I'm happy to play this music still. It doesn't. I probably like it better, maybe, than when I even started, as far as playing it.
Wow. So, has George ever thrown out something that was sort of unexpected, and maybe you hadn't rehearsed or played it much, and you kind of just had to wing it?
All the time. He does that kind of stuff all the time. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, a lot of times when he's feeling really has serious convictions about a certain song or series of songs, he'll call like a rehearsal and have us do it. But a lot of times, what makes us the band that he likes and what makes us, you know, great, so to speak, is our ability to do that when we have to. You know what I mean? Because it happens. It does happen, you know. Little tests, we call them.
What about the chemistry, Danny? You know, when you have so many guys and sometimes they're rotating in and out, how do you sort of maintain or find that chemistry?
Well, I think it's definitely a band family component, and the legacy component, the feeling that what we're doing is important. Yeah, the chemistry is important. I think that a lot of it has to do with the family dynamic, family component in the band, and the fact that also everybody knows or feels like they're doing something that's important, that's contributing to a legacy and an institution of value. Chemistry, everybody has their things, like every family, every band, but ours, I feel like, is for the most part usually pretty good, and I think that it has to do with those two factors: family factor, the fact that everybody really has feelings for each other of positivity and love and compassion. We all do live together for a lot of days of the year, and the fact that we all care about the thing we're doing. I think that's a big part of it.
So George has gone through a lot of ups and downs and changes, business-wise, substance-wise, music-wise, throughout his whole career, and certainly since you've been around. So how is it different working with him now as opposed to 10 or 20 years ago?
Well, I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with the overall personnel changes over time. So whenever personnel changes, it changes the overall makeup and the way that the thing runs. But the thing always runs. So I look at my time and tenure under George over the different years, and yeah, I mean, he's, in some ways you can say, well, yeah, he's healthier now than he probably has been in many years. So we're all really happy about that. That's what's continuing to the longevity of the overall flying of the ship itself. But the makeup of the band and how the band changes a lot of times steers those over time. And I think from an historical standpoint, at least, and a personal one, I think it's just different in different times, you know what I mean? But not something that I can pinpoint and be like, it's this, thing. I a lot of times will listen back to shows and they sound different than how I remember them. So if something that's as ingrained in me as the music we play ends up sounding that different 12, 14, 16 years later than I thought it did, usually for the better, but just in general, and why it sounds different, then I can't pinpoint probably any one particular change in the condition of the overall thing, other than the fact that it changes. This band is like an organic thing. It evolves over time, which is cool.
Well, in that evolution, I mean, I've seen them many, many times over the years, and seen you many times with them. But it had been a few years since I had seen them until recently in Charlotte, and I was really impressed with the new generation, if you will, all these, new bloods that have come in, and I think there's, a new energy and a new flavor to it, and it's just very encouraging and heartening to see the P being kind of evolving and furthering, and just knowing that its future looks pretty bright at this point, I think.
Yeah, I agree. I think you said that pretty eloquently. I think that is, with the coming of the Shake the Gate album, there was a acquisition of newer members that came from some of the sessions from that album. And with the new members, it's just a continuation of the thing. But again, from an historical standpoint, it's common to the cause, if you will. It's something we've been seeing pretty much since 1955, 56, since this thing started, is the personnel, evolving, new people coming in, old people coming back, people staying, people going, it's what's made it last, or it's a piece of what's made it last. It's definitely a part of what's made it last. And yeah, very welcome. Yeah.
I think, Danny, at least for me, there's more of a sense than ever of how important it is and how much to really appreciate that it's still there for us all, because we've lost so many great ones just over the past few years, and Bernie and Peanut and Junie, and the list goes on, but we were losing some over a period of time, going back to Gary, but just in the past few years it's been a lot of hits. So I mean, I'm sure you feel like a certain how does that affect you as a musician, a part of the band, with what's happened the past few years?
Well, I mean, it's an indescribable thing to put into words. You know, these are your mentors, your uncles, your brothers, your closest coworkers, your close confidants. Of course, you know, losing them for any one of us to speak on any one of our behalves is actually quite hard to do, because you know the thing that they contribute to everybody's lives is immemorial, and so there's the beauty in that, and I think they all of the ones we lost were very cognizant of that, very cognizant of that, and so there's a beauty in that. But of course, the loss of them themselves, indescribable, you know, and it's not something that uh, uh, that can be fully understood. Every one of those guys could have several books written about them, you know. So yeah, it's something that's very near and dear to all of our hearts. That dear losses. We've had a lot of dear losses, you know, and yeah, it's a tough thing for sure.